Hey everybody, my name is Stephen Baker and this is part of our resource documents videos, and today I'm going to be showing you and talking to you about racial justice and climate justice and how those are connected, and I'm bringing on a guest with me, so feel free to tune in and I hope you learn something from this. All right everybody, this is Isabella and I'm going to be talking to her about racial justice and how that's related to climate justice. So do you want to just do a little bit of an introduction about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Isabella Falahi. I'm a 17-year-old climate justice activist. Although I'm born and raised in the United States, my family is from Colombia and Iran.
Yeah, awesome. So thank you for telling us a little bit about yourself. So we're going to be talking about racial justice and climate justice and how those are related. Isabella, can you kind of explain to me how racial justice and climate justice are related?
Right, so when we look at who the climate crisis predominantly impacts versus who is most to blame for the climate crisis, it really is broken down by racial inequities and racial privilege. Um, when we look at who perpetuates the most CO2 emissions per capita, it's predominantly the global north and the west. So countries like the United States and Canada and Europe. So the relation between racial inequity and climate justice is simple, but it's a very, very deep history that we have to go into. So I'm going to make it as quick and as spark notes as I can, but in essence, it's the relationship between who's most impacted by the climate crisis versus who perpetuates it, versus who's going to experience the firsthand effects. That's oftentimes countries within Africa, Southeast Asia, and many island nations, and oftentimes people on the front lines within South and Latin America in general. All right. So when we look at a global scale, essentially, I'll just use my family's home regions of the Middle East, or what is commonly referred to as Southwest Asia, and South America. So when we look at these regions, South America in particular, as well as the Middle East, are oftentimes exploited by Western industries and industries from the global north for their natural resources, in particular oil, especially when we look at Ecuador, which experienced brutal oil spills from Chevron. And then when we look at the Middle East, which experienced a war as a result of oftentimes what in the United States and its leaders and policy decisions ended up coming to a conclusion to, was initiating that war. And it was a big, big, big part of fossil fuel lobbying, in fact. And a lot of people don't know this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, one example we can look to in the United States is Hurricane Katrina, right? So, obviously, Hurricane Katrina decimated New Orleans, and New Orleanians were absolutely, their houses were destroyed, their lifestyles destroyed, their livelihood destroyed. They became homeless. They were food insecure. And if you look at the federal response from the United States government, it was incredibly lacking in comparison to federal responses to crises in white communities. Because New Orleans is predominantly, people of color, specifically African American people. You can look to that, immediately and see how the economic infrastructure was toppled, infrastructure in general, roads, bridges, housing, affordable housing was built and bulldozed over by industries, right? And so you can directly correlate that natural disaster with a huge spur in racial inequality and a rising wealth divide between white families and black families. Is there another example that you can give about, that's directly related to racial injustice?
I think hurricanes and what you just mentioned with Hurricane Katrina is actually, it just rang a bell in my mind. I think it was 2017 or 2018. I think it was actually 2018. Was when we saw more and more hurricanes, not in particular to what we hadn't seen from previous hurricane seasons, but they were heightened in the impact in which they had. Particularly when we look at the United States, once again, we saw how Hurricane Harvey and its impacts on the southern coast of the United States was treated drastically different than the response to Hurricane Maria and the way in which the United States treated its colonial subjects within Puerto Rico. And we're talking major lack of resources, thousands of families losing loved ones in Puerto Rico, not just because of the hurricane itself and its impacts, but the aftermath, lack of electricity, lack of food, lack of clean water. All of these things led to an astronomical amount of more people dying as a result of the hurricane
Yeah.
than of the actual hurricane itself.
Exactly. And so you kind of look at government's responses to where an issue happens, and you see these complete inequities and different responses depending on where the area is. So, as we're talking about this, and just to kind of wrap it up, we have a lot of international chapters, and for some international chapters, this issue may not seem as prevalent as it is in other countries. Why is it important that no matter where you are, we have to talk about this, right? The way I view it is we have to show solidarity amongst the climate justice movement, no matter where you're from, what your background is, what your race is, and we have to really understand the intricacies of the climate crisis. So can you kind of tell and explain to people why we have to talk about this, why it has to be a part of our conversations to ensure that we are going to have a better future?
That's a really good question, Stephen. Racial injustice, whether we like it or not, exists in all parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Within Latin America, there is colorism and anti-Blackness. The way the climate crisis disproportionately impacts Afro-Latinos or Latinos with African descent and indigenous Latinos is far different than the way it affects white Latinos. Anti-Blackness that exists within the Middle East and colorism that exists within the Middle East. The same thing that exists in Asia and racism in Europe even. And also for our indigenous siblings within Africa, our indigenous siblings across Europe, like the Sami, our indigenous siblings in Australia and New Zealand. All over the world, there's racial injustice that has occurred. And even if you aren't directly affected by it, you could be affected by imperialism or even colonialism. When we look at the climate crisis, if we are all going to transition to a just future, leaving the mistakes of white supremacy, racism, colonialism in the past as we move on to a sustainable future, then we need to have international solidarity. And we can't see this as, well, this is a US issue. Well, this is a Latin America issue. This is all of our issues. It's not exclusive to where we live.
What we went over is the relationship between the climate crisis and racial justice, which is obviously that people of color across the world are disproportionately affected by pollution, by deforestation, by famines, right? By fossil fuel industries, by resource exploitation. That happens in Africa, it happens in Europe, it happens in Asia. You can look at the natural gas resource extraction in Latin America and South America. And even indigenous people and their resources being taken away from them and their land being taken away from them in America and Canada. And then we also went over, some examples of where this happens. So you can how indigenous people are treated in America and in Canada with the pipelines, or you could look at the Middle East and how their resources have been extracted and then their countries have been destabilized. And then we went over why we have to talk about this, which is it's incredibly important if we want to see a just future, a clean future, energy efficient future, a green future. We have to recognize that racial justice is directly tied to climate justice. And we have to recognize that we cannot fall into the mistakes that we've made before, related to white supremacy and imperialism and colonialism, and that we have to show solidarity with everybody, no matter if they're in Africa or Asia or the Middle East, Latin America, or the United States or Europe. Everybody is being harmed by this crisis, but there are people that are being harmed more than others. And that's really what we wanted to talk about today and share with everybody, this information that's really important. And for that, each local chapter is aware, as you're watching this, that there are issues that you may not be seeing right in front of you, but absolutely exist. And it's important that you share what you learned from this video with people that you know, and open this topic and this conversation up so that we can reach a better future. Do you want to say any final words?
So back on the, I think it was the 70th anniversary of Earth Day, Polluters Out did create a video that covered the full 70 years of inaction in which world leaders and industry officials have perpetuated climate injustice. And the video does a great job at actually going into specifics of environmental racism, such as in Africa and the oil spill in the Niger Delta, such as the racism the indigenous peoples and the Jagalingou, to be specific, in Australia have faced when it comes to the expansion of coal mines, the Ecuadorian oil spills and the way that affected indigenous peoples, and of course the way in which the Iraq war has affected Iraqi civilians and countless people within the Middle East through the massive refugee crisis in which it created. So I highly, highly, highly recommend you go to Polluters Out socials. It's Polluters Out on all social media handles. I'm sure Stephen can maybe plug it.
Yeah.
But the video does a great job of giving you some more in-depth explanations on these examples.
Totally. So, I mean, we're kind of doing a resource collab. We definitely want you to check out the Polluters Out video. It really goes into depth on what's going on and how where the connections are between racial justice and climate justice. So thank you everybody for joining and watching this. And I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, those can be answered through the website, and I hope you all have a great day. All right. Bye everybody. Thank you, Isabella.
Bye. Thank you.